What's up guys, and welcome back to another Honkai style video. Today I'm here with my final impressions of Phainon. I have used him quite a lot on different accounts and different scenarios, different supports, all that kind of stuff, ever since he did actually end up release, and now with it being less than a week till he does leave, I do finally have my official thoughts, so let's get straight into it. Phainon is obviously the most interesting character we've probably gotten ever. We have different archetypes and such as, you know, your basic hyper carry, which he still technically falls under. We have dot, follow-up attack, we have break, we have all sorts of stuff, but this is definitely a unique kind of hyper carry where you quite literally get rid of your entire team after taking the buffs. You literally just take them, yoink, and boom, now you're in ultimate. Closest we kind of had was just someone like Jinglu, who, you know, goes into her stay and then you have the enhanced skill, but that's obviously nothing in comparison to what Phainon does. He fully transforms, makes your entire team go into the departed state so they can no longer act. And it's just Phainon and all the enemies. You can actually advance them and do a counter. You could just do a normal enhanced basic attack, or you can do an enhanced skill meteor once you do have the full stacks. And at the very end, you get the coolest animation in the game to dispel the transformation. Never really had a character where their entire potential was locked behind an ultimate, so the whole playstyle is to get ultimate as fast as possible, and then go into ultimate and then do all the damage. And for Phainon's strength, especially with the supports he does have access to, and the fact that he does kind of work with almost every support, the only problem with him working with all the supports is at the same time, practically every support doesn't get full capability of having the buffs onto Phainon. Just because Phainon himself is so saturated with the generic attack percent and crit damage. So the Sunday buff from his ultimate gets diluted. Sparkle, Bronya, their crit damage buff gets diluted. Attack percent buffs from someone like Ting Yun or also someone like Bronya's as well gets diluted. It's definitely a thing that is a bit scary when it comes to longevity, because obviously the more unique buffs that a character does have and less access to, you know, the more generic ones means the unit can definitely last longer, because you have a more rare buff character that's not going to be getting it from the generic supports. So someone like Anaxa is a perfect example. Anaxa performs so good on all these kind of teams because he doesn't have self-sufficient attack percent and such. He rather is very saturated in the very rare thing, which is defense ignore. And that's where his main thing comes from. So you pair more defense ignore with him, you can get up to 100% a lot easier compared to anyone else. Attack percent buffs on him is going to skyrocket his damage more than practically anyone else. So characters that aren't actually saturated in these crazy buffs actually get the biggest benefits from these supports. It's also why someone like Tribute is so valuable. You know, ignoring the E1 true damage aside, obviously that is completely broken, but Tribute buffs all type res pen and also has the, you know, making enemies take more damage as a form of a buff. Or well, it's still considered a debuff, but you know what I mean. In her buffing capabilities, she makes enemies take more damage. She has more rare buffs rather than someone who has more common buffs, and that will be good for characters. But the thing is, these are not something we commonly get by. You know, we have all-type rest pen in the form of Tribute skill, and the other form is something like Robin E1, which is, you know, 2 whole characters. All-type rest pen is one of the biggest ways to get Phainon to do more damage, since obviously he doesn't really have much unless you do have some dupes. Or well, he gets physical rest pen, but not all-type rest pen, but you know what I mean. These characters that are super saturated in buffs, the next best thing they can get is all-type rest pen, which can be hard to come by. And the two best that have it, again, Tribby and even Robin. The worst part is they can't really target Phainon, so you get ult slower, which for a lot of people who can't actually kill in the first ultimate is a big problem. Phainon also has no access to defense shred or no access to defense ignore, so that's the next thing you can get, but that's also relatively hard to come by. Defense shred is kind of hard to run with him because you don't really have anyone on his teams, because defense shred is an attack and supports don't really provide that. Defense ignore and supports all comes from support eidolons, so that's going to be expensive for a lot of people. So the ways you do actually get to skyrocket Phainon's damage is usually just like throw on Tribute E1. If you have E1 Robin, that could be a big jump for him as well. So to get him to perform at really good levels, it does take some investment, and obviously we need to wait till we get a support that obviously does provide these rare buffs. That's one of the biggest issues I do have with Phainon. That aside, Phainon does still perform insanely well. With everything he does have going for him, even with these generic buffers, he does do a lot of damage at a very low level and low investment. He could still have, you know, 600, 700, 800k per meteor. medium investment that's around, maybe even 1 million to 1.5 million, and at really high investments, you can jump that all the way above 2 million. The enhanced basic attack itself also does a good damage, so you can get charges back really quickly. My biggest issue with his actual kit attacks is the counter. I feel like you don't really get too much value out of the counter unless you just have, a bunch of enemies on the field. Then it can be good, but even then it's still random instances and stuff. I usually find the most success to just use enhanced basic attack, but the counter is so cool. It's so hard to not use it. The only place I find the best success for it is in Pure Fiction, where, it's always 5 enemies. You're going to be able to let them attack you, and you always have like around 7 stacks. So you just loop the gameplay of meteor counter, meteor counter, meteor counter, meteor counter until they're all dead. But in cases with less enemies or someone that doesn't really summon any and it could just be one enemy, the counter itself is pretty worthless when it comes to that. I do wish it was a bit stronger, or maybe even provided something else to give you more incentive to use it, because it is really cool. It's really cool to action advantage of enemies, tank it all, and do a really cool animation back. It's just not a lot of the times you're going to get crazy damage out of it, especially when you don't have higher invested supports once again, because, no brainer, the higher invested supports you have, the more damage you'll do. And if you're on the lower end, then the counter does so much less compared to everything else. So I do genuinely think those are my 2 biggest issues with Phainon. It's the fact that he's so saturated with buffs that are very easy to come by. So it makes the supports that we do have that are good with him, the ones that are just, great to have, it makes their buffs relatively harder to, utilize. Damage though is kind of, like not the craziest on him. Attack percent, he gets a bunch of it. You get a bunch of crit damage, so it's like kind of just hard to utilize. So until the day we do get more supports that provide more unique and rare buffs that can potentially target him in the form of all-type res pen, defense ignore, which, they still throw in these kind of buffs into early Eidolons such as E1 or E2, so I don't really see us getting that anytime soon. He is going to be in a pretty scary state where he might not age too well as opposed to some other DPSs. But at least as of now, and even when his shilling period is over, when the buffs are not all tailor-made towards him, I still think he's going to be fantastic. His level of strength, despite all these issues I have, because this is just a me personal thing, I think these are his issues, but even with that said, he is insanely strong right now, and I think he'll be fantastic without the actual, turbulence buffs and all that stuff. His damage output, especially on a well-invested team, is super strong. There's a lot of setups you can do, whether if you want to, just have a supercharge to get your ultimate as fast as possible, you use Sunday, Bronya, Ting Yun. If you're someone that has a stronger team and more invested team, you could replace one of them with someone like Tribby or Robin. Or if you're someone like me who has really high invested in characters, can get to the first ult no problem and kill in that ult no problem, you can very much just throw, just Sunday and then an AoE buffer in the form of Tribby, AoE buffer in the form of Robin. So practically in every single level that a player could be, lower level, mid level, and high level, there is going to be a way you definitely can get use out of him. So I'm really glad they did make him really fun. So now this is just going to be a more personal section. His animations, oh my god, I still can't get tired of them. My favorite animation is when you end the transformation and he does the whole, red everything around, resets the whole cycle. It's so goddamn cool, bro. I literally extend my runs just so I could see it sometimes, because it, for me, is just beyond the best animation in the game. Like, nothing comes close to that. It's also so good in sound effects, dude. Oh my god. And then, his meteor, that whole thing is so cool. The oh that plays every time you get it gets kind of silly. But, I can look past that at least. This counterattack is really cool. When you can get a good number off it, it's so goddamn satisfying. That hit is so beefy. And the enhanced basic attack, the sound effects on that is also just phenomenal. When it comes to, animations, all that stuff, he's top notch, and I still think he just performs great. Originally, I was going to skip, especially since I got relatively unlucky on the first copy, but, his role in the story, the fact I'm never actually going to get a playable Flame Reaver, this is the closest I'll get. I decided to go for it. I had to get some investment in him just to make sure he does compete pretty well with my other DPSs, so I have a reason to use him. Unfortunately, if you guys saw my summon video, which you could also just check on the info card, I got absolutely rolled. So I'm glad I'm at least having fun with this guy. Like, I'm having a lot of fun using him. He's probably going to be a perma use on any Pure Fiction mode I do. Probably always going to be one side Anoxa, one side Phainon. MLC, obviously, I'm going to be cycling a bunch because, I'm in MLC practically all the time on the game. APOC, he does perform really well in APOC as well, especially now, but a lot of characters perform really good that are like skill-based and stuff right now. So to get a true opinion on APOC, I'm going to have to wait for this one to end. But I still think in Pure Fiction, the counter and meteor reset, the whole loop of that, he performs really good. I think in Pure Fiction, he's great. In MLC, obviously, that is going to be his overall best mode. He performs fantastic in there. And I think even with the shield period, when it is going to be over, he's still going to perform good. And then, again, APOC right now, from what I have tested, he is fantastic. But this one is, kind of insane for him. So I definitely do want to wait until the next APOC so I can kind of get a better opinion on him when it does come to APOC. I've also, tested him with every single dupe level I can. That is more realistic. Actually, I have used him with E6 thanks to one of my friends. I've used him at E0, S0. That is where, it's kind of annoying because you don't have the E1 speed percentage inheritance ratio. You don't have the base speed from the light cone. As a Zero Cycler, it gets pretty annoying. And obviously, you don't have access to the defense ignore from his light cone. The percentage difference is pretty big. So yeah, at E0, S0, I don't really like his performance that much. At E0, S1 though, I think his performance does skyrocket quite a bit. Definitely makes it easier to push up the extra actions into the first cycle. So it's a lot easier to get a Zero Cycle. The whole idea is just to give him as much damage as possible in the form of rare buffs and stuff. And try to kill in the first ultimate. If you can kill the first wave quick enough, it goes great. Pure Fiction loop is a bit harder, obviously, when you aren't having something like E2 giving you extra actions and stuff. But, it's still fine. He still performs great at E0, S1. E1, S1, you definitely do feel that inheritance ratio. Since usually MOC, it gives you enough enemies to feel it, plus the base value you do have. And you also get a bit of extra damage out of it, so it's also just a nice dupe overall. I do kind of wish the base E1 was integrated into his kit. I definitely think he'd be such a better unit if that was in his base kit. But we obviously can't always expect something to be in the base kit that'll make the unit better. And E2, honestly, his E2 feels like his E6. The extra actions you can get is just insane. It gives you extra actions to do a counter to get more charges, just the enhanced basic attack to do more charges. Obviously, that also meaning more damage, meaning you'll get more output than any other kind of dupe you could get. Obviously, next best jump would be E6 because you get to start with 6 core flames. You get the true damage to the highest HP enemy. Definitely does skyrocket his damage so much, but I feel like E2 S1 is literally the best stopping point, which, isn't really shocking to say. Usually it is for these DPSs, but I don't know. His E2 is just like insane. The difference it makes is so big. Thankfully, he still does perform well at a lower investment at E0 S1, E1 S1 even. Those levels, he is really good. But once you do unlock that E2, if you do end up getting it, you'll know what I mean. The difference is just absolutely insane. The extra actions do so much, and then in Pure Fiction, it enables the actual counter meteor loop so much better. So yeah, the difference between E1 S1 and E2 S1 is just absolutely insane. But we can expect that. DPSs usually have the game-changing E2 dupes, unless you're a Noxa for some reason. Which, at least with a Noxa, he kind of, can get set up easier. But, I'm not going to go into that. This is a Phainon video. But yeah, his E2 difference from E1 or E0 obviously is just super big. That extra action you get is so good. Plus, you also do get some more damage overall out of it as well, so there's that. And yeah, again, the bit of E6 I tested thanks to one of my friends. It is insane. You get his ultimate quick, you can just rob an ult straight out of the gate. You skill with her, you do a few attacks, and boom, you're an ultimate a lot quicker. You get that extra access to true damage. But yeah, it's a pretty funny dupe. Obviously not gonna talk about it too much because, why would I talk about it that much? I don't even have it, so most I really can talk about is E2 and below. So yeah, every level, besides E0, S0, I think I am pretty satisfied with his performance. As a Zero Cycler, usually E1, S1 is usually where it's like really nice. Not saying you can't do it at E0, S1, he still does it pretty fine, especially if you do have good damage. And at E2, S1, obviously he cooks, he just absolutely cooks. But yeah, that does wrap up my final impressions of Phainon. I practically talked about him on every single mode, saying where I do kind of think he does perform well and why. Besides APOC, because again, I had to wait for the next one. My 2 issues with him, which was again, the whole oversaturated on self buffs and also the whole counter not doing that much. And then obviously talking about my little fanboy period where it's like, the animations, oh my god, the animations. Practically does cover everything I do think. So if you guys also did end up playing for Phainon, whatever investment you do got, let me know what you guys think. I'm sure a lot of you guys also adore the animations. I'm sure most of you also really like using him as well. Definitely is a really cool unit. I do hope they experiment with stuff like this in the future. But yeah, that does wrap it up. If you guys found this video enjoyable, dropping a like would be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn the bell icon for future videos like this, along with all the tips and style content. And I'll see you later. Peace out.